At the end of my last game streaming video, I was about to say that I wouldn't recommend game streaming while I'm moving transportation. I just kind of assumed that it'd be terrible. But I don't actually know that for a fact. So of course, I'm back with another video because I've tested it out for you and I'm here to share my findings with you all. Basically, utilizing self-hosted game streaming while traveling, such as with the Moonlight app on your phone, is an awesome way to catch up on your backlog of PC games as well as even emulated games. You can have all of your games and emulators ready to pick from a nice, neatly organized front end on any device that you want to pick up and play on. I have pretty much achieved my end game setup here. I am very proud of it. I can die happy, and now I'm ready to push it to its limits in the pursuit of science. So, piggybacking off of my last video where I tested game streaming from other networks by connecting from a remote cabin, I wanted to test the rest of the journey, not just the destination, but the in-between parts too. So the question is, can you stream games while on the move? As in, can you stream games from the back of an Uber on the way to the airport? Can you stream games from the airport terminal? Can you stream games on the airplane itself? Can you stream games from the hotel once you get there? We're going to answer all those questions today, so without further ado, let's get started. First up, can you stream games from a moving car? Full disclaimer here, I did not feel it necessary to film in someone else's Uber, so in this example, I've just asked my girlfriend to drive me around. But we can pretend it's just any Uber you might take to any airport. I've brought with me my trusty Xbox controller with phone clip, as well as my iPhone 15 Pro, and I'm doing a speed test. I decided to film at night, by the way, because when I tried filming during the day, you couldn't see the screen nearly at all, so that's why I'm filming at night. My phone is on T-Mobile's 5G network, and as you can see, I'm getting about 30 megabytes download and 60 milliseconds ping on this random stretch of highway. So I opened up the Moonlight app and launched BigBox on my gaming PC back home. First, I loaded up a Pokemon ROM hack I've been playing lately, and yeah, a turn-based RPG like this is gonna work just fine, even if you have a little bit of lag. Just because of the nature of a game like Pokemon, it doesn't really affect your gameplay if you just wait another few milliseconds to press the A button again. Next up, we have Pokemon again, but this time it's Pokemon Pinball. Now, it is a little trickier to play a game that requires some reaction speed like Pokemon Pinball while streaming from a moving vehicle, but honestly, it was not bad. If it seemed like I was dropping the ball here, it was really not because of the game streaming. It was probably because I'm just bad at the game, but we're working on that. And now for something more modern. I picked Starfield from the list, and once it loaded up, I started looking around a bit, taking in the scenery of the city of Neon. It was a bit laggy, especially as we drove through some bad service areas, but in general, it did work. And finally, I loaded up Cyberpunk, and it must have just been better service or something on this stretch of highway because it seemed to actually be pretty playable. The game streaming kept up just fine, as well as you would expect while you're trying to throw packets of data back and forth at cell towers while driving past them at highway speed. All in all, game streaming from a moving car does technically work. I was pleasantly surprised that the experience worked as well as it did, especially since I didn't think it would work really at all. So next up, here we are at the airport terminal. I've just breezed through TSA and have some time before my flight, or maybe you have a long layover and you would otherwise just be bored out of your skull, but now you can play all your games from back home, so you load up perhaps Starfield or Cyberpunk. But first, let's give the terminal Wi-Fi a speed test. Wow, it looks like JFK is just giving away 200 over 200 here, which is kind of crazy. You'd expect their network to limit each client to something like 15 to 20 megabytes per second or something like that. The gaming experience, though, is pretty great. I could game like this for hours between flights, no problem. The iPad screen is at a comfortable angle. The Xbox controller is comfortable as well and doing double duty here, connecting to my iPad now as opposed to my iPhone from before. So all in all, just a very versatile and comfortable setup to bring with you while traveling. But next up, we are getting on the plane itself. And here's where it gets a little tricky. The plane uses a satellite connection to provide its in-flight Wi-Fi. And I'm not sure how or why it works this way, but the in-flight Wi-Fi does not work on the ground. And because a plane is a big metal bird, cell signal tends to be really bad inside the plane too, even if you're still on the ground on the runway. So this moment in time is really the only spot in our journey so far where I was not able to connect my PC at all because the in-flight Wi-Fi was not on yet and the cell service was not available. But once we were in the air and the in-flight Wi-Fi was turned on, we could finally test out game streaming from the plane. And for the speed test on the in-flight Wi-Fi, we got a few different numbers for our tests, typically around 15-ish megabytes per second, but I had at least one test showing over 100 download speed. But the real telltale sign here isn't really the download speed. What we need to take notice of here is the ping, or round trip latency. When you measure the ping on a normal network, you'd typically be hoping for something around 10 to 40 milliseconds, which would be generally really good for game streaming. But since the plane's in-flight Wi-Fi uses a literal satellite connection, the signal from my device has to go to the Wi-Fi router on the plane, through the satellite modem on the plane, up to a satellite in space or to one on the ground, back to my PC at home, and then all the way back. So if it sounds like the whole going to space thing might take a little extra time, you'd be right. The round trip latency from the Inflight Wi-Fi ended up being close to 700 milliseconds. 1000 milliseconds is one whole second, so you can imagine if the latency were a bit higher at 1000 milliseconds exactly, whatever button you press on the controller would take a whole second to get back to you on the plane. Of course, this is just for science, but for most games, this would be considered unplayable. What I found really interesting though is that your definition of playable varies greatly depending on the type of game. For instance, when playing a turn-based RPG like Pokemon again, it was almost playable. There was a bit of lag while walking around the world map for sure, but I managed just fine. And then when a battle comes up, you just make your selections and then just wait a little bit. No big deal. So if Pokemon's your bag, go for it, man. Game stream on the plane. Do whatever you want. But why not make things more interesting? Why not boot up Microsoft Flight Simulator and fly the actual flight that I'm on? So I did just that. I booted up Microsoft Flight Simulator, selected a similar plane to the one I was riding in, selected my real life departure and arrival destinations, and set a realistic time of day and weather. I don't know how Microsoft Flight Simulator could get simulated better than this unless I was in the actual pilot seat. And what I found was that it was a little tricky to navigate the menus because the UI relies on cursor movement like a mouse even when you're using a controller, so that was a little weird. But once I made my selections and was actually flying the plane, it was almost playable. When you're flying a plane, you need slow, subtle movements, so the lag was really not that noticeable since I was moving the controls so slow. If you make sudden movements while flying a plane, everyone in the back is going to feel it. So best to keep things slow and steady to keep the plane flying smooth. So here I am playing Microsoft Flight Simulator on a plane, and man, I don't care if it's laggy. That was really funny. I'm sure everyone on the plane around me thought I was a crazy man for laughing to myself as much as I was. And finally, just to prove a point for science, a first-person shooter game would definitely be unplayable due to the lag. I just wanted to show that there is kind of a spectrum here in the type of games that you can currently stream on a plane. Turn-based games like Pokemon might actually be playable. Slow and steady games like Microsoft Flight Simulator, a little dicey at times, but still works, so give them a maybe. And finally, FPS games, not a chance. You're going to have a terrible time. So as far as gaming on the plane itself is concerned, I'm honestly surprised it even works at all. So I'd call it a fun test, but for me personally, I don't think I'll be game streaming on the in-flight Wi-Fi, especially since it's a great opportunity to, I don't know, read a book or something for once in my life instead of game streaming all the time. And now that we've gotten off the plane, we've already demonstrated that we can stream in the terminal and in the Uber on the way to the hotel. So let's just fast forward. I really like game streaming at the hotel because you typically not only have a good Wi-Fi connection, but also there are just more options for relaxation while gaming in the room. Want to have a big screen console-like experience? Just bring an HDMI cable and plug into the hotel TV. Now you're big screen gaming. Or does someone else in the room want to watch TV? That's okay. Watch whatever you want. I'll just pick up on my iPhone instead. And of course, you can tell from where this is going that game streaming works just fine on the hotel Wi-Fi. This is just the complimentary Wi-Fi, which says it's best for just emails and web browsing. So maybe we're pushing the limits here, but it seems to be doing just fine. I know you can pay a couple extra bucks for the premium Wi-Fi that says it's for video streaming, but as you can see, the free Wi-Fi is doing just fine. So you could probably save some money by just trying the cheaper Wi-Fi first before paying for that premium Wi-Fi. So now you can catch up on Starfield, Cyberpunk, PS3 emulators, GBA games, SNES games, like even Super Metroid here. You can see I'm wall jumping no problem. So yeah, it definitely works great. I also just want to interject here just for a moment and say that I am not recommending that you take your vacation to travel the world just to stare at your phone and play the games that you could have stayed home to play. This for me is a way to keep up on my backlog and relax a bit in my hotel room while I'm traveling for work or something boring like that. I just wanted to throw that out there. I feel like when I make these videos, it's really easy to see myself and make fun of myself and be like, wow, this guy really travels a lot and just stares at his phone. So yeah, as you can see, you can technically game stream from all parts of this journey, except for the very brief moment when we were taxiing on the runway. Of course, game streaming on the plane did not go that well, but for just those couple hours for me, it's still just really hard to justify buying a Steam Deck or ROG Ally just for that when I can game stream pretty much the rest of the trip. Especially those hours at the airport terminal before flights or on layovers, and back at the hotel room. Those two places alone are going to recoup so much more gaming time while traveling for me than playing a couple hours on the actual flight itself ever will. So I would still call game streaming while traveling a success because of that. And while I'm on the actual plane, I'll just catch up on the book that I'm supposed to be reading, or maybe even watch an episode or two of the half a dozen shows I've downloaded to my iPad for offline viewing, which, is pretty much for this reason, is to watch them on flights. So, we've got lots of entertainment options these days. So anyways, you get the point. There's a lot of ways to kill your time on a plane, and just because game streaming might not be one of them does not mean for a second that self-hosted game streaming is not worth it or not able to be used while traveling at all. If anything, I think this video proves just how easy it is to fall in love with game streaming, because we were really pushing the limits there, and when we weren't pushing the limits, it did just fine. And just one more closing thought. I'm really curious if someday you might be able to game stream just fine on planes if they switch to a satellite connection like Starlink. The satellite connection they use for in-flight Wi-Fi currently is kind of an outdated technology. It's like the old kind of dish that if you lived in a rural area and had satellite internet, you couldn't game on it, period. Like, the ping was so bad you couldn't even play on Xbox Live at home, like ever. And that's what planes are using. But with Starlink, I was reading about it, and they are advertising with their new technology and their webs of thousands of satellites that they can actually achieve high speeds but also low latency suitable for gaming. This article I was reading says the median ping for Starlink was between 30 and 60 milliseconds, which should provide a decent game streaming experience. So if someday airlines switch their traditional satellite dishes for something like Starlink, we could see much better game streaming on planes. A guy can dream. Anywho, thanks for watching, and remember, if you have any questions about game streaming, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Peace.